Welcome to Discograffiti, the music podcast that delivers the objective truth about the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever existed. I'm Dave Gebrow.
And I'm Joe Kennedy.
And here we are. We are here and we are doing this. First things first, you need to know just how seriously we take all this.
Discograffiti is heavily researched, and the music is always reassessed with fresh ears.
And we ain't just covering albums. Nope. No. We do a searingly honest deep dive analysis of all EPs, singles, comp tracks, solo work, bootlegs, you name it, we do it.
And all releases are slapped with an objectively accurate rating from 0 to 5 stars,
which allows us all to come face to face with the true shape of an artist's overall arc.
Today on Discograffiti, we'll be turning the spray cans on the Velvet Underground.
Nobody gave a shit turned everybody gives the biggest shit ever. Okay, so before we start, we've got an incredibly special guest in the cavernous studio of the Imaginarium. Lads and ladies of Discograffiti City, Wired said of our guest's YouTube show, The Needle Drop, instead of deploying $10 words to describe a riff or synth tone, he relies on gestures. It gets at some of the more ephemeral qualities of music that written words can't begin to touch. No one less than the Dean of Rock Criticism, Robert Christgau, said in 2019 of our guest, he seems to have arrived at a plausible brand of 21st century rock crit taste, and he seems to have figured out a way to make some kind of living by disseminating his own criticism in the online age, and that's an achievement. This afternoon's guest is in love with Jello Biafra, so I'm sure he's thrilled that this episode can clearly be described as a penis landscape. Would you please put your hands together and then take them apart and put them back together, etc., for fellow music obsessive and music critic Anthony Fantano. Hey, Anthony.
Hey. I love and I'm very flattered that you took the one nice part of the Christgau quote about me, and you made it sound like he has a positive opinion of me. You took the one nice thing that he said and you quoted it. Thank you.
I just need you to know on a subconscious level that I have your back.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem at all. So, okay, thanks very, very much for doing this. And also, we love your show, but also this is a major, major band for us. And so I just want you to know, we immediately were like, yes, we'll do it with him. Whereas, 99% of the general public would be like, no way, it's the Velvet Underground. We're saving it up for someone special.
Right.
This is, you know what I'm not talking about. This is a big one.
No, it is a big one. I figured this is this is like building block stuff. This is like, we're talking about like atoms and electrons here.
What do they mean to you? At a molecular level, what does this band mean to you? What age are we talking about first?
I think the only age at which you can truly get into the Velvet Underground when you're sort of like, musically and artistically up your own ass in college.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of when I discovered them. For sure.
I think you could probably listen to them beforehand, and for sure these days there are probably tons of kids who are in fact doing that. But I feel
have to be honest with you. In 1985, I bought the vinyl. I was 13 years old of Velvet Underground and Nico.
Yeah, but here's the thing: did you have like the air that one has about themselves when they first cross over into adulthood? Yet you didn't. So it's like I feel like once you're armed with that, the Velvet Underground hits so much harder.
Oh, so much harder. Because, as a 13-year-old listening to White Light, White Heat, you're just, quizzically scratching your chin going, what the hell is this?
When I was that age, when I was, a teenager, I mean, I've talked about this in the show before, it was the mid-'80s, and I was, learning to play guitar and stuff. I wanted to just play in metal bands. I would have not, there's no way I was going to get it at that age. Right. It wasn't really until a little bit later. I think it was, probably the first Velvet Underground song I was even familiar with was probably Heroin, because it was in the Doors movie. I wasn't like a 13-year-old like Dave that was, reading the Rolling Stone record guide and finding all those gem records. I was like, hey, what's this new Dokken record going to be all about? I was not really there until much later.
Listen, my first concert was Bryan Adams with my dad, so I'm not quite as cool as I paint myself.
But the first record I had of theirs was that I bought a comp. I think it came out in the late 80s, early 90s, and that was a great start because that had a little bit of everything from all the different periods, and it was actually a really well done comp.
Yeah, is it the VU comp, the archival one.
Yeah. It was a single CD. It came out in '89. Verve put it out in '89. The best of the Velvet Underground.
So one of the coolest things about this band, as a fellow music nerd, Anthony, I'm sure you can appreciate this. Our love of what I could call right now chapter bands. Like Can would be one, Wilco, even Joni Mitchell. Just where every record you're on a whole different. It's like a different band. And so really they're for every mood.
Yeah, no, I mean, I vibe with that. And I think that's a pretty, usually I use terms like era, for example, but chapter is also a pretty cool term to kind of apply to apply to the way certain art. No, I like the way you did it. This is your show. I'm on your
this
your
is
turn.
Our show, my friend.
No, I do like the idea of kind of looking at the various ways a band or an artist can kind of evolve across their career as different chapters, be it VU or Led Zeppelin or Madonna or whoever.
Right.
Well, a band like this, they didn't, and because of the different times, it wasn't like nowadays you make a record, you go tour it for 2 years, then maybe you come back and make another record. By nature, you're kind of developing a lot slower. Yeah. These guys were making records pretty much constantly. They weren't broken up by like 2-3 year long tours and all that. So the evolution happened really fast.
Yeah, their chronology is just crazy. So
that was true of most artists at the time, but they really, because of their creative, restless spirit, they really did some pretty radical changes pretty quickly.
Right. And so, in the interest of keeping a close eye on what they do here and get a real sense of the arc, everything's split up by recording date here. So, and also I have the release dates as well. I think we can all agree there's so much to talk about. So let's launch into the first segment, a little partition of the show I like to call the run-up that gets us up to the first time they ever laid anything down to tape. Gentlemen, feel free to knock me off the talking perch if you want to talk about any of this stuff. But if there's no interruptions, I have some really interesting Velvet Underground biographical information that's going to get us straight through to their first release, the Velvet Underground and Nico. So I am very, very excited to hear all of Anthony Fantano's opinions on the entirety of the Velvet Underground discography. We have no time to waste. Let's get going. So the foundations for what would become the Velvet Underground were laid in late '64. Some dude named Lou Reed had been in a bunch of garage bands, worked for Pickwick Records. We all love the song The Ostrich. He describes his tenure there as being a porn man's Carole King. He first meets John Cale, a Welshman who'd moved to the U.S. To delve into classical music. He had a Leonard Bernstein scholarship, had worked with experimental composers like John Cage and Lamonte Young.
Yeah, so I'll butt in a little bit here. He came in through all that like Dream Syndicate, like downtown New York kind of scene. This is kind of the where this kind of all kind of is like the birthplace of it with in the mid '60s. So like Yoko Ono was hanging around, Lamont Young, Philip Glass, Steve Reich, Terry Riley. These are all kind of like the kind of composers who are hanging out.
And these are not songs; these are extended drones.
Yeah. Well, some of them,
right?
But it was the common theme with all the downtown New York scene was that it's kind of like a deconstruction of what music is. Like it's a lot of asking, like, what is music really? So he comes from that sort of avant-garde background, and it was kind of in with all of these guys.
Which is an incredible mesh with Reed, because Reed is a very, very inspired, but a very by-the-numbers songwriter.
Cale specifically was Lamont Young was really like his mentor.
Right. And so the first group the two of them had together was the Primitives, short-lived and assembled really to just pump out budget-priced recordings and to create the Ostrich, to which Cale added a cherished viola passage. So they recruited Sterling Morrison, a college classmate of Reed's, at Syracuse University as a replacement for Walter DiMaria, who'd been a third member of the Primitives. So at this iteration of the band, Reed and Morrison both played guitars. Cale played viola, keyboards, and bass, and a guy named Angus McLeese joined on percussion. They were first called the Warlocks, then the Falling Spikes. Very much a sort of beatnik, finger snapping version of what the VU finally became. Phase 1, the imploding plastic inevitable, 1965 to 1968. So, in July of 1965, these suckers put the first thing ever down on tape. You can find it all on the incredible box set, Peel Slowly and See, which features the color form on the front of being peelable quality.
Yeah.
So
still have mine all these years later.
Yeah, me too. It's definitely one of the best box sets that there is. This is Lou Reed, John Cale, Sterling Morrison at their Ludlow Street loft, recording a demo tape without Angus MacLeese. Rating this feels like a dick move, so let's just rate it nascent and seminal, shall we?
Ephemera.
So in the fall of 1965, Cale's friend and Dream Syndicate associate Tony Conrad introduces a book to the band called The Velvet Underground by Michael Lay, about the secret sexual subculture of the early 1960s. So Angus MacLeese, he of soon-to-be departed, thought that it'd make a great band name, so he pitched that in at least. The band unanimously decides on the name in November of 1965. So the next month, Al Aronowitz, who is manager and music journalist, arranges for the group's first paying gig to play at Summit High School in Summit, New Jersey, which is about 30 minutes from where I grew up, opening for the middle class, a Y instead of an I in middle, for $75. This is December 11th, 1965, first gig. When they decided to take it, MacLeese, he of the super strict morals, abruptly leaves the group, protesting what he considered a sellout. So he was replaced by Mo Tucker. So the playing style here, very unusual, very caveman-like.
Yeah, so I couldn't get over listening to Mo play a lot. I always really liked her playing, but I feel like I have a newfound appreciation for it. I guess I realized this at some level, but she uses only 2 limbs to play the drums. She's really just her hands, no feet. So it's whatever you can do with your 2 hands. I mean, I may be mistaken, but it sounds like to me like she's executing everything with just her hands.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting way to play, and she was a real asset for the band, I think. They makes them way more interesting having her than having just a conventional backbeat sort of standard drummer.
She also preferred standing up rather than being seated,
right.
And often used mallets. So in 65, she comes into the group. After being introduced to the Velvet Underground by underground filmmaker Barbara Rubin, Andy Warhol becomes the band's manager, and he very innocuously suggests Nico, who was born Krista Pafkin.
And this whole merging of like the art world and rock and roll at this time was something kind of new. There's really this sort of art school, art rock kind of, and I mean art rock in terms of like hanging out with like visual artists.
This is mainly how they're able to do whatever they want, is because they have Warhol.
Right.
And, they do figure that, we'll at least make our money back here. So that leads us into, this thing that actually is very important in the evolution of live music in general. It's not really talked about in any kind of mainstream way, but truly, I believe, what became known as the rave started with something called the exploding plastic inevitable. So
I thought at one time that going to if I could be in a time machine and go anywhere, I'd be like, that'd be cool to go to. But I would probably not have a great time there.
You know what?
It's the ultimate too cool for school thing of ever. It's like the ultimate.
You hit it on the head in a way I've never even heard written about. It's so true. I would love to have been there, see the Velvet Underground's seminal early performances, see all these factory superstars, Gerard Malanga doing the snake dance, all the liquid light show projections, all the Warhol movies being projected on them, totally groundbreaking stuff. But just like you, I think I'd find myself in the corner watching these vampiristic, narcissistic people and wonder what time I'm gonna leave.
Yeah, I don't think there was any age where I would have felt cool enough to to be with.
I think you may be right on this one, 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, so after the November 4th, 1966 show at Valleydale Ballroom in Columbus, the next thing that occurs in their timeline, March 67, the Velvet Underground and Nico comes out. Anthony, you've heard of this record.
As far as like, I guess what you could call modern art rock. It's like pretty much the rubric, in my opinion. And there's just so much on the record to this day that like I hear employed, not just on weird little underground Bandcamp projects that I run across every once in a while, but even more mainstream stuff too. Especially considering like how popular it is to, just sort of verb things out to the point where they're just like dreamy as hell. Be it with artists like Tame Impala, or I mean, there's dozens that you could list that have everything from cult followings to platinum selling records. So just like everything about this record, from its lyrics to its textures and tones, to some of the weird instrumental palettes on it, to me, just kind of like, just looks like just a gigantic splash in the water, which like at the time that it came out, culturally it wasn't. It sort of took time to build up that momentum. But the momentum is there, and the reverberations of that are still being felt to this day, whether people are, actually conscious of where some of these ideas and sounds are coming from or not.
Yeah. It is kind of like the you can hear so much of like Pavement and REM, and that sort of like the absence of blues in the guitar playing, and the emphasis on the sort of drones and the sort of the clean kind of arpeggiated guitar. It is kind of like indie rock before indie rock existed.
And I have to say, I have no idea how many times I've heard this album. It's possible over 1,000. I really come back to it all the time, and every time it blows me away. And that's you can't say that about very many records. And it actually did better than history allows. The common knowledge is that nobody bought it, and eventually, everyone started a band around it. But by 1969, it had actually sold close to 60,000 copies.
That's still not that. That's not that much.
It's not great, but it's better than nothing.
Let's talk a little bit about Andy Warhol's role in this. So he's listed as executive producer, and his great contribution to it was that he didn't let anybody get in there and mess it up. Right. He didn't let anybody try to, like, the suits come in.
And he paid for it. He paid for the recording session.
Yeah, so he's, Tom Wilson is actually kind of turning the knobs and producing the record, and he's a really interesting producer in his own right. He was, he did Like a Rolling Stone and The Sound of Silence. He did like the Mother's Freak Out, and did the first Soft Machine record. So interesting guy that worked with a lot of these kind of like high art sort of projects. And they just let him kind of be themselves. They didn't really try to be like, oh, let's get a more conventional drummer, or they didn't really try to clean it up. They just sort of let him do their thing. And I think that, Warhol having the final say of anything, he was able to prevent that from happening. He was able to just kind of let them do their thing, even though he wasn't really producing it. I think he did have an important role.
I mean, they kind of knew just by having that album cover that they were destined to sell X amount of copies. So that I think they knew their investment was at least protected, if they weren't going to, actually make a bucket load of money on it. You want to let's go track by track. I mean, this really warrants turning the microscope down on the record. If you have not heard this album, I have no idea how you stumbled onto this podcast. It's kind of a miracle. The algorithm is prescient then. But of course, in all likelihood, you have. So Sunday Morning, right from the go, is the only song that was recorded in 1967. Everything else was recorded back in 1966. And there's a gentleness of sound on this song, a very billowing, super floaty vibe to it that belies the idea that this is actually the anthem for drug paranoia.
Not just that, but I mean, like, probably in the top 10 of like opening melodies for any album of all time.
Mm-hmm, totally.
Like that melody, as gentle and I believe it's like, what is it, like a glockenspiel thing?
It's a Celeste.
There you go. It's a Celeste. So, either way, like it's just so sweet and gentle, and but also hits very sharply, because there's even though it's not a super aggressive sound, it does float on top of everything happening underneath it throughout the entire song, like, just beautifully.
Yeah, and this is one of these where it is kind of a song about paranoia, but there's also this sort of there's kind of an empathetic thing to the Velvet Underground to me that I think kind of gets overlooked. I think they kind of, like, to me, I always felt like they really that Lou as a songwriter really identifies with the characters in his songs. That it's kind of not a put down.
Oh yeah,
that they're kind of a band that champions the sort of forgotten and the looked down upon. They're a band that really.
What's interesting is to compare him to Paul McCartney's writing style, because if you compare Lovely Rita to Caroline Says, the ability to get into somebody versus just watching them it's
that's a songwriting technique that Lou uses a lot, but I think they're kind of misunderstood in that way a lot. I think that they're kind of looked at as this kind of nihilistic sort of bands, but I think they have a very human, empathetic quality. That's what Sunday Morning feels like to me.
Yeah, this could be on the third album. This could start the third album.
So Waiting for the Man next.
Yeah.
This is a good example of Mo Tucker only playing drums with two limbs. She only uses two limbs ever to play the drums. So that in itself is just like a deconstruction of what drums are. If you say, okay, I can only use two limbs, you're pretty much like, really deconstructing the idea of playing drums to something simpler than what it is, really, for most people. So this is she's just hitting that one note over and over again. Da, 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 da. That's it. That's the whole part. And it's perfect. Because if you had, think about that song, if it had a traditional like rock backbeat, it wouldn't have that chugga chugga kind of thing to it that makes it so magic.
Great quote from Lou Reed. Everything about that song holds true except the price. $26, not an accurate reflection, apparently, of what heroin was costing at the time. So, amazing song. We can all agree with that. By the way, one quick thing about Sunday Morning. Didn't know if you guys knew this. You probably did, but originally that was Nico singing that live, and Lou sang it on the record.
Right. Yes, I could see how that could be a Nico song.
Okay, so Femme Fatale. Now,
speaking of Nico, this is there's three Nico songs in this record. I think seems like it's just the right amount of Nico.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's a handful.
It is. So this is Andy Warhol's request, actually, for Lou to write a song about Edie Sedgwick. That's what Femme Fatale is. So, and then when Lou Reed said, "What should I write?" and Andy Warhol said, "Oh, don't you think she's a femme fatale, Lou?" So there you have it. Andy somehow kind of gets his mitts in everything in a very, very subtle way. So what's interesting to me about Lou Reed, here's the $64,000 question. How could Lou write such incredibly affecting material that was completely impersonal and doled out as really just an elevated writing assignment, and yet was handled so compassionately?
He's a prose pro as a songwriter. Femme Fatale's
right. I mean, he had plenty of time, sort of like not just songwriting, but also songwriting in the industry. So it's like he's kind of already used to the idea of like creatively operating in a space where there's almost like a deadline or certain expectations for the song to sound a certain way or encapsulate a certain vibe. So
he's writing for hire.
He's writing for hire from his soul for himself. It's an incredible combination.
Yeah, he's just a talented songwriter, and who has this is a good example. He knows also, I think, from his experience working in a sort of brill building-ish kind of environment. He knows some tricks. Like Femme Fatale. It's sort of a 1/4 chord change, very simple. But he plays the chords instead of just major chord triads. He plays them as major sevenths. So they have a little bit of this kind of wistful melancholy to them. It would be a really different kind of song if it didn't have those major 7 chords in it. It gives that sort of dreamy kind of tension. That's kind of a pro songwriter trick. He doesn't do that often, but he knows that it worked on that.
Most songwriters or bands that are looking for any kind of a dichotomy, like look how incredibly talented and broad our talent is. To put "I'm Waiting for the Man" next to Femme Fatale would be like a party trick. But the thing is, they're both incredibly profoundly successful at what they do, albeit being completely different.
And also, like, let's appreciate this as one of many moments on the record where, and I think this, like, kind of ripples out today in all the ways in which, like, genres and cultures such as indie rock, for example, kind of, cherish or champion, at least to a degree, like amateurishness.
Right.
Look at like kind of the green around the ears charm of something in the track, like, the background vocals just like kind of apathetically going, she's off and nobody in that group vocal is like selling it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so
that cold diffidence is part of the sell, though.
Right. Well, exactly. It ended up being a part of the appeal.
Right. And then, interestingly, Venus and Furs, so they were doing all this S&M type stuff before the name of the band actually even came down the pike. So they already had wayward tastes. So now we're into S&M, bondage, all kinds of weird stuff. We have very strong presence of cacophonous electric viola, and Sterling Morrison on bass, one of many times during the record where he plays bass, does it very, very exceptionally well, but he hated playing bass.
Yeah, it's got a great bass line in the song, actually, for listening to this and first.
And to your point in terms of like what you were just saying about like Lou's songwriting ability with Femme Fatale, I feel like personally I can kind of tell on this record when he's writing a song, and obviously he's doing a good job of writing a song, but I feel like I can tell the difference between that and when he's really into the topic that he's singing about.
Yeah.
And I think on Venus and Furs, he is very into, I feel like you kind of hear it in the feverish way with that he sings with the opening lines, like shiny. It's like, wow,
it's
dude,
creepy. You're a
like,
creep. You're a young creep. You're
really loving this. You're loving this, you sicko.
And I have a chubber, so I'm implicit.
There's also the tension with Reed and Cale, because Venus and Furs to me always seemed like a Cale song. So when Cale leaves the band, they almost all become kind of singer-songwriter-y songs. But I feel like it's on the Cale songs where he
not
manages
just
to sort
you
of
make a really good point, but it's not just the singer-songwriter thing. The material becomes so simple.
Right.
That Lost fourth album, those songs are Moon, June, Spoon.
Right.
1,000%.
So Venus and Furs also has the influence of that downtown New York thing. It's kind of built on that drone, and they really understood the kind of psychedelic nature of a drone like that. Like, this is an incredibly psychedelic song. Like, it just makes you feel so stoned just the minute it comes on.
No, for sure.
The slightly out of tuneness of the viola and all that. So,
this is brown acid, to be clear. This is not the sunshine or the
and this is just
pane.
the sound they made. There's not really a lot of studio trickery happening here. This is just them playing the song the way they play it. So, very impressive, amazing track.
So the next tune has always been my least favorite on the record. That to be said, it's I believe it's the least consequential tune on the record. Doesn't mean it's not awesome, just by comparison. Run, Run, Run was written on the back of an envelope by Lou while they were on the way to a gig at the Cafe Bazaar, and you got a ton of great characters in this. Teenage Mary, Margarita Passion, Seasick Sarah, Beardless Harry, and they're all either using or looking for drugs. So, but it's a great garage rock song, but just sort of on a different level of urgency.
The guitars are tuned down to whole steps. They're playing in D, so they have this really kind of slack sort of guitar feel. And I love Mo's playing on this because again, she's just using the two hands, so she's doing that but with just her hands. So she can really lock into a groove pretty good with just the two hands. This is a pretty this chugs along real nice. This is more kind of like a groove kind of song. This sounds like them playing at the factory or something. More so.
Yeah, I agree with the assessment that maybe this track in the grander scheme of things doesn't seem as consequential as a cut with like such a stunning melody as Sunday Morning, or a track that like for its time had such a profoundly different and unique sound to it, like Venus and Furs. But like in comparison with all the other tracks here, this one rocks.
It does.
It's just got a great momentum to it,
and it's great. It's great in the sequence because it breaks up Venus and Furs and Altamar's Party. So these two
right,
heavy,
because then you just have like two droney tracks on top of each other.
Altamar's Party's next.
Yes,
incredible.
Yes. What a song. First of all, it's kind of a whole cottage industry in itself. You got a music festival named after it, a William Gibson sci-fi novel. This was also recorded during April '66 at Scepter Studios. Great piano motif by Cale, an incredible vocal by Nico. I don't know what you guys think. This is my favorite Nico moment.
I had the same thing in my notes. Her best vocal, I think. Really stentorian kind of vocal on this.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on the vocal, Anthony?
it's not so much about like the vocal for me as much as it is how the vocal kind of locks in with everything else that's droning in the background behind it. Like it's really like the culmination of like even more so than Venus and Furs. Like Venus and Furs to me is a very intense, like it's drony, but I don't really feel like necessarily stoned with it because of how intense the violins and how almost like shrill they are in a way. Whereas like, you know, All Tomorrow's Party is like pure, just like reverberation, just like everything vibrating on exactly the same wavelength. And it's all like kind of culminating in this really just, you know, kind of just surreal sort of experience. It sounds like it's a song coming to you from another dimension or the future or something like that.
Yeah. Especially during the guitar solo. There's just something about that section.
Well, this is, again, the downtown New York thing. That's opening piano motif is very Terry Riley. That's very much like that kind of like arpeggiated Terry Riley kind of thing. And then, you know, the grafted, this, you know, song's 7 minutes or something.
And by the way, this is one of the first pop songs to make use of prepared piano.
Right. Yeah. So you know, the downtown art guys are like, you know, they're you know, they definitely made an impact.
It was paper clips on the piano strings.
So, but this, you know, the song's 7 minutes long, but it doesn't really feel like it.
Not at all.
It's really a comfortable 7 minutes. So
it's unquestioned. It could be my favorite song on the whole record, but it's certainly in the top 3. The next song, you know, probably had the most profound effect on me, not in terms of becoming a junkie, thank God, but the intensity of this song and the simplicity. I mean, like a 2-year-old could have written this one. Not lyrically, of course, but it really is an astounding piece of work. And also, a lot of people don't know, it was written in 1964.
Yeah, right. He had this early, like when he met Cale, he had this song already.
Yeah, yeah. So he was actually... Reed was talking with WLIR in 1972. He said that he wrote the lyrics while working for a record company.
By the way, I don't think we've mentioned it's the song "Heroin" we're talking about.
Right. So
the effect of the bass drum is a beating heart. I mean, totally brilliant. It sounds like you're having kind of a heart attack. I think it's really rushy.
The lyrics absolutely astounding.
Kind of feels like you're dying. Kind of sometime parts of the song, you know, like ecstatically kind of dying. I mean, wow. I mean,
and just the momentum shift of it all as well, because like it, you know, the intensity wouldn't be anything if the song was obviously like, you know, just like this slow drone the entire time, or just like, you know, breakneck speed from front to back either. Like it's, you know, this really kind of gentle intro, and then you have like the eventual rush in the ascent, and then you know, it sort of takes a lot for everybody on the track to be kind of as locked in as they were, but simultaneously like, you know, effectively a little messy and a little loose, so that it sounds like chaotic as you would expect, you know, this kind of experience to sound, and then for it all to kind of come back around again, you know, as organically as it unfolds.
Yeah, it just goes to show you what kind of, in an unconventional way, what excellent musicians they really are. You know, to create something, they're kind of, you know, looked at as kind of primitive, but
and there's actually a clam in here. There's a famous clam.
Yeah, there's all clams all over the records,
clams,
but it's not really.
It's like an ocean.
Their greatness as musicians kind of comes from something different. You know, it comes from their ability to like listen and like play the right thing, and you know, not play the wrong thing, and it's more about playing the right note.
And just play together.
Right. Yeah. And this you have to be able to do that to play this song well. You know, this song's magic. It's incredible.
It is magic. You know, this I actually had an incredible experience to this song. So. In 1988, so I was 16, I went to Wellesley College has a summer program for high school kids to sort of set up a fake college. And there was, you know, the punk kids who hung out by the loading docks, and they were like real hardcore looking Mohawks and everything, but they did not know the Velvet Underground. And we had a lip sync thing. And myself and my friend Jeremy Countryman did Heroin, and they were making fun of me, and they lit their lighters.
Of course, they were making fun of you.
No, in the beginning they lit their lighters because it starts slow. They thought I had chosen some Harry Chapin.
By the end,
song.
You won them over.
No, by the end, I was tying off on stage. And I looked at them and their mouths were just hanging.
You're the best 13-year-old ever.
To be fair, I was 16.
Okay, that's still pretty impressive.
It was a very memorable evening. Anthony, did this have a powerful effect on you when you eventually discovered this?
At the time that I got into it, I think I had already been listening to like a bunch of different post-rock bands, from like the 2000s. And there was something about, just kind of like that very gentle and kind of intense crescendo, if you could call it that, because it's very stripped back. It's obviously not a huge instrumental rush or anything,
Right.
but there's something about, kind of that progression to it that snapped to me in, that time. And just also to, hear Lou singing so boldly and so upfront about something that, knowing what I did about the music of the time when they recorded this, I was like, how did this get out on record?
Yeah.
Like, this is not the kind of thing you hear on a Beach Boys LP, even though, they themselves and their group were, in their surrounding group.
Oh, they
were heavily
dabbled. They
into
more than
this kind of
dabbled.
shit.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely.
We'll have you on for the Beach Boys one too. We'll need an hour 45 for that one. All right. So the next one is "There She Goes Again," which, to be fair, is just the guitar riff, the sort of staccato thing that it does is just taken wholesale from Marvin Gaye's song "Hitchhike."
Yeah, you call it. It's a quote. I would say
It's a quote. Yes, and I'm not saying you're plundering.
That's the
it.
nice way to say.
Yeah. It's a terrific song. It's one of the least celebrated songs on the record, and I think it's one of the best. I think it's a great song.
I mean, Lou just kind of can write it. He can write pop songs like this so easily. This one seems like one that just kind of probably came off the top of his head. One of the sliders. I'd say this has kind of more of a fun factor than Run, Run, Run.
Yeah.
But it's kind of in the.
It's
one of the slider kind of songs.
Yeah.
And then the next song is "I'll Be Your Mirror," which is kind of like it's a little bit in the Sunday morning kind of space, but a really beautiful Nico ballad. Also, one of her excellent vocals. One of my favorites.
Written for her.
Yeah, "I'll Be Your Mirror" is written by a guy that knows how to write songs. I mean, that's a professional songwriter kind of song.
It was actually done. The vocal takes were done over and over and over. They finally made her break down crying, and that's the take that we get here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, like, just like with the previous track we talked about, and many others on here, there's like always kind of a dark underbelly quality to it. Again, almost no matter what you're talking about, but like "I'll Be Your Mirror" is like one of the few moments on the record where it seems like there's actually a genuinely lovely sentiment being kind of conveyed here, and I think that is one of the many things that makes this track stand out.
I'll tell you one thing that would have taken from the experience of listening to this track. "Quote unquote" producer Andy Warhol suggested, thank God this was not taken up, that there was a built-in scratch that would happen. So the line "I'll be your mirror" would just repeat infinitely unless you stood up and walked over to it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Pad's not taken. So the Black Angels Death song.
Yeah, the last two songs on this record are kind of like a little rabbit hole. I always
that
kind of
portends to what's coming around.
Yeah, I always think of them together. These two always pair to me. But go ahead.
Yeah. So this is in the interest of pure cacophony, just to come up with something that just feels like it's seething evil. In late '65, Al Aronowitz arranged for the Velvets to play at Cafe Bazaar for just a little bit in December '65. So while they were there, they played an absolutely crazy version of this song. And the manager ordered them to never play the song again, to which they responded by playing it much, much harder than they had. They were then sacked. The hissing sound that is a sort of hysterically brief sub out for a chorus is actually just Cale hissing into the mic.
He does it. They did this song in the 1993 reunion show, and it's really interesting to hear him play that viola lick. It has a very distinctive way he bends the notes. Kind of, it's a really like crazy technique he's using to get that drunken kind of viola sound. But then he also does the hiss sound in the live show, which I appreciated hearing.
This is neither a good or bad song. It's just like
this one to me is essential. This one's
great,
a big part of the vibe of this record.
It's such a just mood thing.
Yeah, the record, it gets really dark at the end, and I think that's the appropriate way to end. After there's a few things in here that are kind of sweet, but the way that it resolves on the last two, kind of steer it where it kind of resolves in a kind of a dark way, and then kind of hints at what they would do next.
And it also just like kind of ends up giving you like a full helping of what many of the songs in so many ways are just kind of like flirting with up until that point.
Yeah, right.
You know, because it's just like, this is, you know, we're at the end here. We're not going to, we've been sort of like teasing you with this, and we've been giving you like tastes of like how weird and dark certain things that we're talking about or presenting to you can be like, and now here it is just unadulterated.
Right. And the European Sun really lets it rip fully. That's
the older I get, the more I like that song.
Yeah, that's where they're going into full skronk, like what they would do on a Crazy Night at the Factory or something.
This is basically like it points to Sister Ray as far as what's coming down the pike.
Right.
Yeah. Anthony, what's your relationship to this song?
You know, I agree with your assessment there. I mean, you know, I'll say like Sister Ray, which we will very soon talk about, is one of my favorite Velvet Underground songs of all time.
Yeah.
Easily.
So, you know, and I do tend to, you know, like a lot of sort of winding experimental rock that's kind of loose. It doesn't necessarily have like a super clear direction when you're starting out. I mean, I'm also a pretty big Swans fan too. So, you know, hearing them go in this direction is like, you know, kind of in my wheelhouse, even though I do love the very short and sweet and succinct songs that are all up, you know, all happening up until this point.
Right.
To hear them like let loose, you know, in this way is kind of refreshing. It's sort of like,
and that breaking glass, man, the chair dragging across the floor and the breaking glass. What a bold fucking way to announce yourself.
I love all that.
Yeah, it's great, just terrific.
All right, so rating this thing. I mean,
a couple things first. Hold on, before we go there. So it's one of the greatest album covers of all time. Can we all agree on that?
Yeah, amazing.
And possibly the greatest debut record of all time. Is it possible that this is the greatest debut album of all time?
Well, if you're asking my opinion of it, I cannot possibly hold this record in higher esteem. It's in my top 5 records ever of all time.
Yeah, it's.
I would say it's the greatest debut album of all time. If you were asked me, even outside of the context of this episode, this would be my first answer.
Everyone's got their outlook as far as where punk began. You could easily make the case that it started here. You could make the case that it was Dave Davies slitting his amp before he recorded "You Really Got Me." There's all kinds of, but this, you could easily make the case it started here. This is a very hard 5.
Obviously 5 stars for me. It's all you know. Can't say much more about it. It's
Anthony, 2.5 stars.
I wouldn't hesitate to give it 5 either.
Okay. Just
where do you rank it in the pantheon of debut albums? Short list or a longer list?
I would say on a shortish list. Mm-hmm. You know, I never really have thought about the record in respect to other debut albums. Honestly, I think about the album when I think about the album, I think about it more in terms of like other art rock albums. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you know, by that metric, I would say it's like easily in the top 5. You know, I mean, it's really kind of like, again, it's the rubric. It's like, you know, it's a patient zero. It's the inception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the Stanley rubric because it looms tall, just like the monolith in 2001. So then Andy Warhol leaves the scene. Here's Reed on leaving Warhol. He sat down and had a talk with me. You got to decide what you want to do. Do you want to keep just playing museums from now on and the art festivals? Or do you want to start moving into other areas? Lou, don't you think you should think about it? So I thought about it and I fired him. So
it didn't work though.
Yeah, exactly. So Nico moved on after the Velvet severed their relationship with Warhol. I just want to talk quickly about Chelsea Girl. Chelsea Girl is her debut solo record that came out in October '67, featuring some tunes written by VU members. So really what you're looking at is you've got 10 songs on there, and 5 songs are written by any iteration of Lou Reed, John Cale, Sterling Morrison, and Nico. And those songs are Little Sister, Winter Song, It Was a Pleasure Then, Chelsea Girls, and Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams.
And that's a good record and my favorite Nico record overall.
Yeah, it's a really good one.
It's the Nico record. Though you know, what is it?
Marble Index is great, but
Marble Index I'm also very impressed with.
But I agree with both you guys. I think that you know, there's other great stuff, but there's this really beautiful windswept autumnal feeling about this record that I always connected with. However, you did just before we say goodbye to Nico, almost for good through this whole story. She had The Marble Index, Desert Shore, The End, Drama of Exile, and Camera Obscura, and then Exjunt Nico. In early winter of 1967, there are 5 pre-White Light, White Heat demos that you can find on Peel Slowly and See. We have the following 5 songs: There Is No Reason, Sheltered Life, It's All Right the Way That You Live, I'm Not Too Sorry Now That You're Gone, and Here She Comes Now. So let's go over these because to me this is very much canon.
Well, the first thing about it that I kind of noticed is the tape has a lovely kind of like warble to it. It was done
which adds to it.
It just adds to the vibe.
It does.
That kind of tape warbling sort of thing is very in fashion these days. But yeah, it sounds cool. This sounds pretty cool. The star of the show for me is the early version of "Here She Comes Now."
That's so good.
Which is it's really
in
psychedelic.
Some ways it's better than the released version.
It's very crudely recorded. It's kind of out of tune, but there's something super hallucinogenic about it. Really psychedelic.
It's amazing. This actually, I agree with you in the sense that I feel like. This selection of 5 songs builds as it goes.
Yeah.
There Is No Reason in Sheltered Life. They're okay. Sheltered Life has a fucking kazoo solo, not a VU high point.
Yeah, they're kind of goofing around a little bit.
Yeah. It's All Right the Way That You Live is a small piece of perfection, I think.
Yeah.
I always love that
That
song.
would seem like that wasn't going to fit in with White Light, White Heat. It would have been an odd fit on that album.
Yes.
But it's cool, though.
As a standalone, it's great.
There's a nice tune underneath there.
Yeah, it's definitely going on the playlist. I'm Not Too Sorry Now That You're Gone. Samesies, another forgotten great consigned to the demo dustbin of.
You can see the startings of like a different kind of record than what they made. Because if you take these 3 and you think of like if that was the core of the record, what the record would have been like. There's a kind of a mellower record that a path they could have taken.
Yeah, I give this little section of songs 4 stars.
I give it the same 4 stars.
Sweet, man. In September 1967, the band records White Light, White Heat. It's eventually released in January 1968. This is like an anvil dropped on your head. Did you have the same kind of experience with it when you first heard it, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing how chaotic this record is, but like in the grander scheme of like the rock pantheon, I mean, yeah, you could say that they flirted with this on their debut, yes, but like on their debut,
they doubled down.
It's almost like the rubric for art rock, but with White Light, White Heat. There's so many moments that are just like the rubric for noise rock.
Yeah, this goes it goes straight to post punk. Just skips over punk entirely.
Sure.
My favorite thing about it, I think, is that it's kind of a concept album. I mean, this is recorded in September '67, so they're writing this material during the Summer of Love. This was designed from the beginning to be a reaction against San Francisco's Summer of Love, and also an attempt to capture their live sound.
Yeah, well, they have Tom Wilson back in the producer's chair. Right. He's brought back for this record as well. And again, he just lets them do their thing. This record is so blown out and crazy sounding.
It's
like
so nuts.
It's so in the red.
Letting them do their thing, I think, is like, that's putting it lightly.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like he let them do their thing on the last record, but he definitely.
Yeah, and by the way, a key thing to realize is that he would never work with them again. This was it.
Yeah, I think he's a great producer. Actually, yeah. I think he kind of doesn't really get his due for how many cool things he did and how many and like his open mindedness as a producer at that time. I love him. And this record has such a unique fingerprint to it.
Yep.
It's so in the red, and it's so just the sound of like tubes distorting and tape distorting and the console distorting, and all those things feeding into each other. But it's a really kind of lovely, kind of scuffed up, kind of blown out sort of sound to my ears.
I love what Sterling said about it. We were all pulling in the same direction. We may have been dragging each other off a cliff, but we were all definitely going in the same direction. So the album was released at the end of January '68. It peaked at 199 on the Billboard Top LPs chart. This was their last studio recording with Cale, and it was very heavily influenced by free jazz and Ornette Coleman in particular. A good side thing to keep in mind is Rolling Stone refused to review the record when it was initially released. And of course, very predictably, it's now been listed in the top 500 greatest albums of all time.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this thing just builds and builds and builds.
Well, this record to me is one that, I mean, I do love it dearly, but it has a major flaw, this record, isn't it? There's 13 minutes of it that I just don't really like.
Yeah, I know.
So,
yeah. The Gift and Lady Godiva's Operation.
So those two are a little rough for me. But
let's go in order. Let's go in order.
I personally, I'll say I find Lady Godiva's Operation very funny. Like it's and the thing is, like, there's not a whole lot that you know from this era that you could say, oh yeah, this is like they were completely on their own wavelength on that track, and just like the panning and everything.
Yeah, there's
like,
all that crazy stuff going on too.
It's insane. Like I just I'll say, like, I know I'm skipping ahead here, but like, you know, do I enjoy it and do I listen to it in the same way that I would like, you know, I don't know.
Like the first
Led
record.
Zeppelin's Black Dog. No.
Right.
But the thing is, like, you know, when I listen to it, do I love to observe it as like a really weird art piece? Like, you know, like I would like, some kind of, you know, obviously like throwing a fucking urinal inside of a inside of a, you know, inside of like an art museum or a gallery. Yes, you know, that's almost kind of how I see the song and why I sort of dig it as much as I do.
Yeah, you got to give him weirdo points.
Yeah,
even though that track is like maybe the most shining example of it, I feel like a lot of the songs on here are on that same wavelength to one degree or another, which is why, you know, this record feels in some ways even more cohesive to me than the debut does.
Yeah.
Oh, it's definitely more cohesive because it focuses on only one strain of their music instead of trying to do a Whitman sampler.
Sure.
But you know, any album that starts off with the meth version of "Got to Get You Into My Life," you know you're on a wild fucking ride. And the pictures of them from that time, you know, that severe short buzzed cut that Lou had, and all those choke collars, they looked like you just wanted to give them a wide berth. That first song is so incredible. You have that heavily distorted electric bass outro that Cale's playing over that single chord that supposedly was, you know, I've never shot meth, thank God, but purportedly mimics like the throbbing, ear-ringing effects that you get during the rush. But it feels like a nail gun to the skull. Yeah. That song is just incredible. I love, and it feels rooted in the 50s. It feels rooted in
absolutely, like the swinging, you know, kind of rock groove to it. You know, to sort of like compare it to Femme Fatale, you know, the background vocals on this one feel almost peppy by comparison. You know, the White Knight, like it's very groovy, it's very sweet, it's very fun. But you know, you're right. There is something about the sound of it that feels like it's all happening like in a noise tunnel.
Yeah,
it's got that great scuffed up kind of thing to it, where it's everything's distorting. You know, like
I'm not going to argue against the next couple of songs not being up to snuff. You want to take it from here, The Gift and Lady Godiva's Operation.
The Gift and Lady, to me, those are two things that they had. You know, The Gift is kind of like a short story that Lou wrote at Syracuse, my alma mater, by the way, and. You know, and then Lady Godiva, I think it's the same thing. They're kind of like these sort of story songs that, you know, that are both very repetitive. I think are they really the crimes of those songs to me. The story of The Gift is really impossible to follow, kind of. One cool thing about it is the music is panned to one side and the story is on the other side. So you can, by panning, you can mix as much of each element in there as you want.
What I do like about it is that it reminds me of the, you know, endlessly incredible EC comics.
Yeah.
But, you know, agreed. You don't, the replay value.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But then the rest of the record, so it closes with, side one closes with Here She Comes Now, which is
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful droney kind of minimalist sort of thing.
I love a Harry Chapin song about making a woman orgasm.
Right. And then side two, though, is really where this record seals its reputation.
Moving right along, because side two, it's as stunning as Joe has alluded to. It's one of the greatest album sides of all time. I Heard Her Call My Name and Sister Ray, a 5-minute song and a 17-minute song. I Heard Her Call My Name is a love song for a dead girl. Reed's guitar playing, inspired by Jimi Hendrix. There's elements of garage rock, but now we're in an area that seems to be, he seems to be the only one inhabiting it. Also, I am an avid purveyor of the idea that the line that you utter before your guitar solo needs to be just as spot on as the guitar solo. And the line, and then my mind split open, is so fucking great.
Yeah. And then the solo is great. The solo is kind of like it's one of the best anti-guitar solo. Definitely Ornette Coleman, free jazz, inspired. Where the what really matters is how much intensity you're putting in. Almost reminds you of how like Greg Ginn would play or something.
Anthony, do you hate this song?
No. I think like Run Run. Well, even more so than Run Run Run. This is like one of the most kick-ass songs of all time.
Yeah.
Just
I agree.
again the pacing, the momentum of it. I heard her call my name. Like it's just got a great vibe to it all around.
This gets overlooked because of Sister Ray, but in a lot of ways, this is crazier than Sister Ray. Sister Ray kind of settles in a little bit of a more laid back groove.
Sister Ray's a slow burn, kind
It
of,
is.
and it gets to really crazy heights, but it kind of builds to it. Where I heard her call my name.
I would say it's a slow burn that eventually ends up turning into a world engulfing wildfire.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. When it finally finishes burning, it's really burning.
Yes.
So I guess we're at Sister Ray now.
We're at Sister Ray.
Sister Ray.
I gotta say, so this was an important turning point in my life. I was in high school. I was 17 years old. It was right before senior year of high school. The first time that I tried LSD, and it was an amazing experience. And that night we went to sleep. It was like 5 a.m. We put on Sister Ray to go to bed.
Oh
And
God!
I feel like that that made me cool for the rest of my life. I feel. This song is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go on. Oh, I was going to say I thought it was funny that the gift was pointed at as maybe like difficult to kind of follow the story, but like Sister, if that's the case with the gift, like Sister Ray is a fucking shit show.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, Lou says, here's his quote: "Sister Ray was done as a joke. No, not as a joke, but it has 8 characters in it, and this guy gets killed, and nobody does anything." So It was built around this story that I wrote about this scene of total debauchery and decay. But no, so the coolest thing about this is they don't really do anything. They sit around. It's basically about an orgy that doesn't quite take off.
It's kind of a Shaggy Dog story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that.
I mean, there is some ding dong sucking, but
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, for me, this track is like really about, as you were saying, like the depravity of the lyrics combined with just Mo and the organ. Like it's really about like, because the organ just seems to, as the song is progressing along, just burn hotter and hotter and hotter. I'm just like, why is this?
The engineer left the session. About 5 minutes in, the engineer basically said he pieced out of the session and left.
Yeah.
And so Cale had the loudest amp. He was playing organ, so he just kept going over and turning up the amp. So by the end, it was just so loud that it was just bleeding into all the other mics.
Yeah.
And he just drowns everybody out, which is kind of part of the magic of the track. It's like you get Cale's
it's interesting.
Cale's attitude is just kind of built into the arrangement of
One of the
I didn't know he was progressively turning it up.
He kept going up to his amp and turning it up. Yeah.
Got it. Well, if that's the case, then that would totally explain like why by the time the song is ending, the organ is just burning everything else down.
And it also explains why at the end of that song he was out of the group. that was it. This is Cale's finale with the group.
Yeah. Great way to go out.
It's not a perfect album. Side one's got some peaks and a couple of valley-ish moments as well. I struggled with it a little bit when I was 14 back in 1986. I came at it too early, and I remember how it made me feel as if a stranger was trying to lure me into a candy-stuffed van. So
there's no candy in the van, man.
No candy here. I give it a hard 5. I really do.
I gave this one 4.5.
I overlooked the faults.
Yeah, I gave it 4. Well, considering that about a third of it I don't really like. That's 4.5 is still a pretty high compliment. The rest of it is so good that I think it's like at minimum a 4.5 star record for me. So yeah, even though I kind of always skip those, still love it.
Yeah, I'd probably give it 4.5 as well. I mean, I think it is just like 6 tracks, but it is a bit of a choppy 6 tracks. Like there's certainly like a chaotic element to all of it that does kind of make it all make sense as like an entire piece. But it is a little all over the place. As much as I do kind of enjoy each moment on it individually, and that's kind of where I sort of feel like I enjoy it the most. It doesn't really necessarily. It's a little jarring to kind of jump from track to track. As much as I enjoy all the tracks, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe with a different sequence. Maybe if we had White Light, White Heat and Heard Her Call My Name like next to each other, that would make a bit more sense. Like,
I
given
smell
kind
a
of
brand new
their-
box set with your name emblazoned upon it.
given like their driving quality and everything, and then maybe put the spoken word tracks right up against Sister Ray and just like totally fuck up the second half,
Right.
But anyway, like even with the flow being as choppy as it is, I think the record is just as groundbreaking as the debut in so many ways. It just doesn't feel like as maybe a complete experience because it's not covering as many bases, even if in some elements, in some respects, it does feel a bit more cohesive.
Yeah, well, the back half of their catalog, I think, also remains pretty cohesive from record to record. I think maybe because Lou is doing so much of the, it becomes so much more of a Lou kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that's really, we're going to get to that next episode.
There's so much more to talk about. I mean, there's a couple more records. There's records, lost records, records between records, live box sets. There's
personnel changes.
Personnel changes. But before we end this episode, I just want to touch on this. You may be one of our super fans who's been tuning in for dozens of weeks already. You might be a brand new listener to the Velvet Underground experience during Needle Drop Month here. But I just wanted to ask, in case you are new, or even if you're one of our old standing friends, what is Discography? Yes, it's a podcast, you asshole, of course. But also, the way that I see this, Discography is a community. It's a community composed of soldiers of sound. That's what we are. And we refute the notion that it's hard to make friends after college. Get rid of some old shitty friends who don't care about music anymore. They're just taking up all your time. Make some new friends, friends that care. Not just about new releases and reissues, but about you. Step 1, join our Facebook group. Get involved. Follow us on Twitter at Discography and on Instagram at DiscographyPod. Please, right this second, pause this stream and rate the podcast 5 stars along with a beautifully worded review, especially if you listen to us on Apple or Spotify.
None of this 4 3/4 stars business.
No, that's ridiculous. It'll help, not just Joe and I, but eventually, seriously, all of us. Step 2, communicate with us. The most important thing in the world is our listenership. I'm going to return every note and letter as I consider myself first and foremost a denizen of the collective unconscious. In other words, I belong to you. Step 3, keep in mind that the link to the playlist is in the show notes and also on our website, discography.com. It's an invaluable resource. Step 4, using the link in the show notes or on Facebook, etc. Let us know who you think we should turn the spray cans on next, or even if you're qualified and want to inquire about being a guest on the show. And then finally, step 5, start a whole new life and begin anew, Discography style. Having done so myself, I can tell you flat out that it's the only way to live. We'll see you next time, next week, for the Velvet Underground Part 2 on Discography.